We're continuing to play around today with this little wet into wet demonstration. No real solid objective in mind other than to demonstrate a few of the techniques used when we consider wet into wet dynamics and how to get the pigment working the way we want it to on the paper, staying in control to some degree but doing its own thing in other places. We've used the Magic Dragon brush, the wonderful 1-inch flat Kolinsky Sable brush, to lay down our foundation washes and to again help blend some of the pigments together. Wonderful brush that carries a great deal of water and pigment. And now we're going to move to another set of brushes that I've used for close to 2 years now, the Cheap Joe's Dragon Tongues, Kolinsky Sable, with somewhat of a traditional taper, but a little bit longer, and they come to a really nice fine point. I'm using a number 14, and I have a number 10 and 12 also here that I use. Even in a large wet into wet landscape, a 22 by 30 piece of paper, really these three brushes and the Magic Dragon are almost all the brushes that I need, unless I want to add a few fine details with a rigger or some other small brush. But generally, if you have these three brushes in these three sizes and a Magic Dragon, you've got everything you need to paint wonderful wet into wet watercolors. Again, I'm going to blot off on my roll of toilet paper and paper towel there. And we're going to use Prussian blue, and I'm going to also pick up a little bit of ultramarine violet, both American Journey colors. Come in here, we still got a little bit of dampness in the paper, and just play with some mountain range shapes. And you can see that you get wonderful clean control with this brush. This is a number 14, size 14, Cheap Joe's Dragon Tongue. I can even come back and put a little green in the mountain. And we're again looking at creating a middle range mountain shape here. The nice thing about wet into wet is you can create some diversity of color and value within a shape that gives your painting a lot of interest. And you can do it very easily because there again the water and the saturation of the paper is doing most of the work. You see how nicely that blends down into the lower layers of the landscape we're creating. Let's just go with some pure ultramarine violet over in this last little section. Now we're beginning to look like some of the mountain ranges close by around here. Let's have a little fun with the base of the mountain, again using this same brush. Come in and catch the bottom wet edge of this mountain range. This is a Cerulean yellow, which is a wonderful transparent yellow. Will not go very dark in value, as the case with most yellows, but it's a wonderful pigment for blending other colors together, creating shapes and transitions. You can actually glaze a painting that is not well unified with cerulean yellow and pull a lot of these shapes together after the painting is even dry. You have to be careful that it doesn't start bronzing or turning metallic on you when you do that, but if you do it carefully with light glazes, you can really pull the shapes together nicely. And again, I'm just creating some movement that kind of approaches the foreground, warmer in the foreground, cooler in the background. Going to dry this shape just a second. Now that I've given the foreground a little bit more character and movement, I can switch to one of my smaller Dragon's Tongue brushes, maybe the 12, and I can come in now. We'll add a little bit of phthalo green, a color of great power and staining qualities, and a color that will allow you to achieve very dark value, almost the same value as black on the value scale. So a little goes a long way of the phthalo colors. I'll add a little UFO in the sky up there. So with the number 12 dragon's tongue, I'm going to pick up a fairly dense amount of phthalo and Prussian blue. Again, take the excess water off my brush, and I can come in and begin to create a forest edge. Again, look at the wonderful point that you can get in making those pine trees, evergreens, incorporating them into your painting. Put a little ultramarine in there to diversify a bit. So now I'm moving into creating a forest buffer zone, I guess, of trees and shrubs that set off the background mountain quite nicely. Again, let's just for fun do one more shape with this great brush, carry it up into some of the mountain region. Again, one of the things we want to look at from a design standpoint when we come in and make forest shapes and get into making trees is that we create a lot of diversity in our height and our movement through that shape that we're making, so that again we don't tend to be too symmetrical with the tree shapes. It's good to think of creating these kinds of forest boundaries as sort of a rhythmic process. Up and down, halfway, 1/4 way, 2/3, but that we don't get into 1/2, 1/2, 1/2, 1/2 and have kind of a bounce along rhythm to the painting. So again, look at our shapes that we're making fairly carefully and move through that forest boundary. Got one big tree standing up there all by itself, so we're going to give it a companion there so that again it doesn't look so conflicting and alone. Now the nice thing when you get up into the tops of these trees, you can again not have to switch to a rigger brush, because the tip of this dragon's tongue is so refined that you can move right into smaller shapes without any problem. You see now we're getting nice blends of shades of green, blue, and violet through this bottom area. Let's go over here and clean our brush and take just a little bit of the burnt sienna again in a fairly thick concentration, and we can come in again and tie some of the boundary of this forest into the field that lies in the foreground of our painting. So you get the idea that using the transitions between these two brushes, or these two series of brushes, the Magic Dragon to be your real load carrier in terms of pigment and water and get down your basic washes in a fairly quick fashion, and then switching over to the Dragon's Tongue brushes as we move into modeling and forming phase. The phases that we've talked about today are prepping everything properly, including your pigments and your Kilimanjaro paper in terms of saturation. We've talked about the foundation washes, and in that we use the Magic Dragon Kolinsky Sable because it's a real powerhouse of carrying pigment and water. And then now we switch to finish up the painting or get to at least the last 10% of the painting with the Dragon's Tongue Kolinsky Sable brushes. A great quiver of brushes to have for the wet into wet technique.